Imagine a world where the largest creatures to ever walk the land rule absolutely, where a single footstep shakes the ground hard enough to send ripples through standing water 50 feet away, where the sky belongs to winged reptiles with wingspans wider than a city bus, where the oceans hide things so massive, so perfectly engineered for destruction, that nothing swims safely. This is the Mesozoic era, 165 million years of dinosaur dominance, an empire so vast, so deeply rooted into the fabric of life on this planet, that if you had watched it from the outside, you would have called it permanent, unshakable, forever. And hidden beneath the roots of the ferns, beneath the fallen logs, in the darkest cracks of a world that was not built for them, something small was waiting. Not a predator, not an armored giant, not a creature with claws like scimitars or teeth the size of railroad spikes. Something you could hold in the palm of your hand, something that weighed less than a handful of coins, something with a heartbeat so fast you could barely count it, with eyes too large for its skull, with fur the color of dead leaves, pressing its tiny body into the cold, dark earth every single time a shadow passed overhead. For over 100 million years, mammals lived like this, hiding, trembling, surviving on insects and seeds and whatever scraps the giants left behind. Generation after generation after generation, never growing larger, never climbing higher in the food chain, never daring to step into the light. And then, in the span of what is, geologically speaking, a single heartbeat, everything changed. The dinosaurs were gone, and the trembling, hiding, coin-weight creatures inherited the Earth. This is not a story about an asteroid. Well, it is, but not in the way you think, because the asteroid didn't hand the world to mammals. It cracked open a door. What happened next? The actual takeover, the explosion of mammal diversity, the conquest of every ecosystem on the planet, that required something that had been building for over 100 million years, underground, in the dark, in the cold, in the silence beneath the dinosaurs' feet. This is the story of the most unlikely revolution in the history of life on Earth. This is the story of how the smallest, most overlooked creatures in the Mesozoic became the ancestors of every elephant, every whale, every bat, every wolf, and every human being watching this right now. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the asteroid, not the beginning of the extinction, the real beginning. 225 million years ago. The Triassic period. The world looks nothing like it does today. The continents are fused into a single landmass called Pangaea, a supercontinent so enormous that its interior is a scorching, bone-dry desert that stretches for thousands of miles with no ocean breeze to soften the heat. The poles are warm. There is no permanent ice anywhere on Earth. The atmosphere holds more carbon dioxide than modern lungs would find comfortable. And life is rebuilding. Because roughly 25 million years before this moment, the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history had just finished its work. The Permian extinction, the one scientists sometimes call the Great Dying, had erased something close to 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land vertebrates. The world had been nearly sterilized. The ecosystems that took hundreds of millions of years to build had been collapsed, shattered, reduced to rubble. Now, in the early Triassic, survivors are filling the void. And among those survivors, almost invisible against the backdrop of the recovering world, are the cynodonts. Say that name, Cynodonts. It sounds like something from a science fiction story. But these are real animals, and they matter enormously because cynodonts are what scientists call a stem mammal group, creatures that are not quite mammals yet, but are traveling down the evolutionary road that will eventually produce them. Cynodonts look, to the untrained eye, like some strange hybrid between a lizard and a dog. They have a more upright posture than the reptiles around them, with legs positioned more directly under the body rather than sprawling out to the sides. Their teeth are beginning to differentiate. Instead of the simple, uniform teeth of most reptiles, some cynodonts are developing distinct incisors, canines, and molar-like cheek teeth, a feature that will become one of the defining characteristics of mammals. Some cynodonts, based on bone microstructure analysis, appear to have been warm-blooded, or at least approaching it. Some may have had whiskers. Some show evidence of being more active at night. And here is where the story gets interesting. Because the Triassic world they are moving through is a dangerous one. Ruling the land in this period are the archosaurs, the group that will eventually split into two great lineages. One lineage will become crocodilians, the other will become dinosaurs. And in the Middle Triassic, the proto-dinosaur lineage is winning. The first true dinosaurs appear roughly 230 million years ago, most likely in the region that is today South America, in what geologists call the Ischigualasto Formation in Argentina. This is the same formation where paleontologists would later discover Eoraptor, one of the earliest known dinosaurs, a creature about the size of a golden retriever, bipedal, fast, and clearly built for a world that was about to change dramatically. At this point, dinosaurs are not yet dominant. They share the world with many other large archosaurs, with big amphibians, with early mammal relatives. The world is competitive and dangerous in every direction. But something is happening in the climate. Around 201 million years ago, at the very end of the Triassic, another mass extinction strikes. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, likely triggered by massive volcanic activity as Pangaea begins to break apart, wipes out a huge portion of the large land animals. The big, competing archosaurs that were holding dinosaurs in check, gone. Many of the large amphibians, gone. The major competitors for the large animal ecological roles, cleared from the board. And the dinosaurs who survived this extinction with relatively few losses step into the empty world and explode. Within a few million years, dinosaurs occupy nearly every large animal ecological niche on the planet. Herbivores the size of buildings, carnivores with skulls longer than a human being is tall, creatures that shake the earth with every step. The Age of Dinosaurs, the true, full-scale, planet-dominating Mesozoic empire, has begun. And where are the mammals in all of this? Small. Staying small. Because from the very beginning of the Jurassic period, something is already shaping mammal evolution in a direction that will, 135 million years later, make the takeover possible. The first true mammals, animals that meet the full scientific definition, including a particular jaw joint structure and a specific arrangement of the middle ear bones, appear in the fossil record at roughly the same time the dinosaurs are beginning their rise to dominance. Creatures like Morganucodon, found in fossil sites in Wales and China, and Megazostrodon from southern Africa, give us our first clear pictures of what early mammals actually looked like. And what they looked like was this: small. Very small. Morganucodon was approximately 10 centimeters long, about the length of your index finger. It weighed somewhere between 1 and 2 grams and roughly 2 grams. It had a long snout packed with sharp, insect-shredding teeth. Its eyes were large relative to its skull. Its brain, and this is important, was proportionally larger than any reptile of comparable size alive at the time. Specifically, the regions associated with smell and with processing sensory information were already enlarged. Based on analysis of bone growth rings, the same technique used to age trees, Morganocodon appears to have grown relatively quickly and had a relatively short lifespan compared to reptiles of similar size. This suggests a faster metabolic rate, a warmer body temperature, the beginnings of the mammalian engine. This creature was already, in its small, scurrying way, something fundamentally different from the reptiles around it. But it was also unmistakably at the bottom. The dinosaurs were above. The dinosaurs were everywhere, and the mammals, the true mammals, the first members of our lineage, were pressed into the cracks of the world, into the dark, into the night. And that darkness, it turns out, was not a prison. It was a laboratory. Here is a thought experiment. Take two animals of identical size, place them in the same environment, give them the same food sources, the same predators, the same challenges. Now change one variable. One animal is active during the day, the other is active at night. Within a few million years, those two animals will be almost unrecognizable from each other. Because the night is not simply the day with the lights off. The night is a completely different world, with different rules, different pressures, different problems to solve, and different evolutionary rewards waiting for the creatures that solve them. The mammals of the Mesozoic were forced into the night, forced there by the sheer dominance of dinosaurs during the daylight hours, forced there by the fact that a creature weighing 2 grams has exactly one survival strategy in a world full of predators the size of buses. Don't be seen. But in forcing mammals into the dark, the dinosaurs may have accidentally done something extraordinary. They gave mammals over 100 million years of night school, and the curriculum changed everything. Let's talk about what happens to a body, to a lineage, when it commits to nocturnal life over geological time. The first and most obvious adaptation is vision, or rather, the transformation of vision. Daylight vision, the kind that most reptiles rely on heavily, is built around cone cells in the retina, photoreceptors that are excellent at detecting color and fine detail in bright light, but nearly useless in darkness. Night vision is built around rod cells, photoreceptors that are extraordinarily sensitive to low light, but poor at distinguishing color. Early mammals, under the relentless pressure of Mesozoic nights, underwent what scientists now call the nocturnal bottleneck, a dramatic reorganization of the eye toward rod-dominated vision. The evidence for this is written into the eyes of nearly every mammal alive today. Compared to reptiles and birds, mammals have dramatically fewer types of cone cells. Most reptiles have 4 types of cone cells, giving them rich, full-spectrum color vision that extends into the ultraviolet. Mammals, almost universally, have only 2. We lost 2/3 of our color vision. We lost it because for over 100 million years, color didn't matter. Survival in the dark required something else entirely. What mammals gained in exchange was a visual system of remarkable low-light sensitivity. Rod cells were packed into the retina in densities that made night vision far more acute than anything the dinosaurs could manage. And critically, mammals developed a structure called the tapetum lucidum in many lineages, a reflective layer behind the retina that bounces light back through the photoreceptors a second time, squeezing every last photon for information. This is why a cat's eyes glow in the dark when you shine a light at them. That glow is the tapetum lucidum reflecting the beam back at you. It is a piece of hardware 100 million years in the making. But the eyes were only the beginning. Think about what it means to navigate in darkness. You cannot rely on vision as your primary sense. You need something else. Something that can build a picture of the world without light. Hearing. The mammalian ear is, by any objective measure, one of the most remarkable structures in the history of vertebrate evolution. And the story of how it developed is one of the most extraordinary pieces of evolutionary detective work in all of paleontology. Here is the puzzle that scientists spent decades trying to solve. In the jawbone of every reptile, including the ancestors of mammals, there are several bones at the back of the jaw, bones called the quadrate and the articular, which form the jaw joint itself. These are solid structural bones, part of the mechanical system that opens and closes the jaw. In modern mammals, those bones are gone from the jaw entirely. They have migrated across millions of years of evolution into the middle ear. They became the malleus and the incus, two of the three tiny bones that transmit sound vibrations from the eardrum to the inner ear. The three bones of the mammalian middle ear, the malleus, incus, and stapes, create an amplification system of extraordinary precision. They allow mammals to detect a far wider range of sound frequencies than reptiles and to detect sounds at far lower volumes. Scientists pieced this story together over decades, using the fossil record to track intermediate stages where the jaw bones were still connected to the jaw, but had already begun their journey toward the ear. Creatures like Morganocodon and the slightly later Anaconodon, found in early Cretaceous rocks in China, preserve transitional states of this process in stunning detail. In some specimens, the bones are still physically attached to the jaw by a thin rod of bone. A snapshot of evolution caught mid-step. The result of this transformation was a hearing system of almost absurd sensitivity. Modern mammals can hear frequencies ranging from infrasound, the low rumbles that elephants use to communicate across miles, all the way up to the ultrasonic frequencies that bats use for echolocation. No other vertebrate group spans this range, and it all traces back to those nights in the Mesozoic, where hearing the soft movement of an insect in dead leaves or detecting the approach of a predator from 50 meters away in total darkness was the difference between surviving until morning and not. But there is a third adaptation that may matter most of all: smell. The mammalian brain is in many ways a smell processing machine that later added other functions. The olfactory regions of the mammalian brain, the parts dedicated to detecting, analyzing, and remembering scents, are proportionally enormous compared to those of reptiles. In early mammals, neuroimaging of fossilized brain cases has allowed scientists to reconstruct approximate brain structure. A landmark study published in the journal Science in 2011, led by researchers from the University of Texas at Austin, used high-resolution CT scanning to examine the brain cases of two early mammals, Morganocodon and Hadrocodium, both from the early Jurassic, and found that the relative size of the brain had increased significantly compared to their ancestors, and that the increase was almost entirely in the olfactory regions and the neocortex, the region associated with sensory processing and, much later in evolution, complex thought. The world these early mammals inhabited was a world of scent. They mapped territory, found food, identified mates, detected predators, and navigated the landscape primarily through smell. And the brain grew to accommodate this, building neural architecture that, millions of years later, would be repurposed for memory, for problem-solving, for social complexity, and eventually for the kind of recursive, self-aware thinking that produces a species capable of wondering about its own origins. The darkness shaped the brain. The brain made everything else possible. Now add to this one more piece of the puzzle, perhaps the most important of all. Warm blood. Endothermy, the ability to generate and regulate body heat internally, is one of the defining characteristics of mammals, and it comes at an enormous metabolic cost. A warm-blooded animal needs roughly 10 times more food than a cold-blooded animal of the same size, because most of that food is being burned simply to maintain body temperature. This is, on the surface, a terrible strategy. You need constant fuel. You need to eat constantly. If food becomes scarce, you die faster than a reptile would. But endothermy gives you something that no cold-blooded animal has. It gives you the night. Reptiles, including dinosaurs, though the picture here is more complex, and we will return to it, are dependent on external heat sources to warm their muscles to functional temperature. In the cool of night, a cold-blooded animal slows down. Its reaction times lengthen. Its muscles lose power. In the extreme cold, it can barely move at all. A warm-blooded mammal is the same temperature at midnight as it is at noon. In the Mesozoic night, while the cold air slowed the metabolism of potential predators and competitors, the tiny mammals moved freely, efficiently, and with full muscular power. They hunted insects with precision. They explored territory without the constraint of a morning warm-up period. They were, in the dark, genuinely free in a way that no other land vertebrate of their time could match. This is the nocturnal bottleneck in full operation. 100 million years of darkness, slowly forging a body plan and a set of neural and physiological tools that were, in many ways, superior to anything the dinosaurs had built. The dinosaurs looked down at these small, furred, night-running creatures, if they noticed them at all, and saw nothing worth worrying about. They were not entirely wrong. For most of the Mesozoic, the mammals stayed small, stayed nocturnal, stayed hidden. The ecosystems were locked. The large animal niches were occupied. There was no room to grow, no space to expand. Evolution could refine the tools, sharpen the hearing, deepen the olfactory processing, tune the metabolic engine, but it could not break the ceiling imposed by 165 million years of dinosaur dominance. And then something happened that no amount of evolutionary refinement could have prepared any living thing for. But before we get to the asteroid, before we get to the 66 million year boundary that geologists can find in rock layers on every continent, the thin dark line of iridium-laced clay that marks the end of one world and the beginning of another, we need to spend some time underground. Because while the large story of the Mesozoic is the story of dinosaurs, the hidden story, the story that paleontologists have only recently begun to read clearly, is the story of what the mammals were actually doing during all those millions of years in the dark. And it turns out, they were doing quite a lot more than hiding. The fossil record of Mesozoic mammals is frustratingly incomplete. Small bones are fragile. Small animals rarely die in places where fossilization is likely. For most of the 20th century, the known Mesozoic mammal fossil record consisted largely of isolated teeth and jaw fragments, tiny, easily overlooked, requiring specialist knowledge just to identify correctly. But beginning in the 1990s and accelerating dramatically through the 2000s and 2010s, a series of extraordinary fossil discoveries, many of them coming from the Yishan Formation in Liaoning Province, China, began to reveal the true diversity of Mesozoic mammal life, and what that diversity revealed was astonishing. Castorocauda lutrasimilis, found in rocks dated to the Middle Jurassic, roughly 164 million years ago. A mammal with a broad, flattened tail like a beaver, with limb proportions suggesting it was a strong swimmer with teeth adapted for eating fish. A semi-aquatic mammal in the Middle Jurassic, when, according to the old textbook model, all mammals were supposed to be tiny terrestrial, insect-eating generalists keeping well out of sight. Velaticotherium antiquum, another Jurassic mammal from Liaoning, this one equipped with a membrane of skin stretched between its limbs, a gliding membrane, like a modern flying squirrel. It was using powered or assisted aerial locomotion 160 million years ago, tens of millions of years before the first bats. Rhipinomammus giganticus, Cretaceous period, from the same Liaoning beds. This one is large, for a Mesozoic mammal, with a body length estimated at around 50 centimeters and a weight of perhaps 12 to 14 kilograms. That is roughly the size of a medium-sized dog. And inside the ribcage of a related specimen, Rhipinomammus robustus, paleontologists found something that genuinely shifted the way scientists think about Mesozoic mammal ecology. They found bones, small bones, clearly belonging to a juvenile dinosaur, a young Psittacosaurus, sitting in the stomach region, still articulated enough to be identified. A mammal, eating a dinosaur, in the Cretaceous. The textbook image of tiny cowering mammals hiding from every dinosaur that walked past began to crack. Not everywhere, not for most species, but the diversity was there. The experiments were happening. The ecological range was far broader than anyone had imagined. Scientists studying this period now speak of an adaptive radiation that was already beginning in the later Mesozoic, a slow, constrained expansion of mammal body plans and ecological roles, pushing carefully at the edges of what the dinosaur-dominated world would allow. Not a revolution yet, not a takeover, but a system under pressure, a lineage full of potential that had no room to expand. A spring slowly being compressed. For 100 million years, that spring compressed. And 66 million years ago, something arrived from space and released it. 66 million years ago, late Cretaceous, the Maastrichtian Age. The last chapter of the dinosaur empire is already being written, though nothing alive on Earth knows it yet. The world at this moment is warm and green and extraordinarily alive. The supercontinent of Pangaea has long since broken apart, and the continents are drifting toward the configurations we would recognize today, though they are not there yet. A shallow inland sea, the Western Interior Seaway, still divides North America down the middle, running from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Ocean. Europe is an archipelago of large tropical islands. India is an island continent moving northward on a collision course with Asia. The poles are warmer than today, though they have cooled significantly compared to the deep Jurassic. And the dinosaurs, despite what some narratives suggest, are not in decline. This is important. This is something the fossil record has been telling us with increasing clarity over the past 2 decades of research. The old story, the one that appeared in textbooks through much of the late 20th century, suggested that dinosaurs were already struggling before the asteroid arrived, that diversity was falling, that the empire was already crumbling. The current evidence does not fully support this. Ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, the group that includes Triceratops, were diversifying actively in the final million years of the Cretaceous. Hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, were abundant and ecologically dominant across multiple continents. Tyrannosaurs in North America and Asia were at the peak of their evolutionary development. Ankylosaurians were widespread. The skies were full of pterosaurs and the early birds, the avian dinosaurs, that would be the only members of the entire dinosaur lineage to survive what was coming. This was not a dying empire. This was a functioning, complex, deeply established biosphere that had been operating continuously for over 160 million years. And it had approximately 72 hours left. Some researchers have estimated the actual duration of the initial catastrophic events in different ways, and we should be precise here. The impact itself, the moment the asteroid crossed the boundary from space into atmosphere, happened in seconds. The immediate regional destruction took hours. The global effects took days to weeks to begin, and the full ecological collapse, the complete unraveling of the food web that had sustained the dinosaurs, took months to years. But let's start at the beginning. The object that ended the Mesozoic was, according to current scientific consensus, a chondritic asteroid, a rocky body rich in carbon compounds, roughly 12 to 15 kilometers in diameter. For reference, that is approximately the distance from one side of a major city to the other. It was not a particularly large asteroid by the standards of the solar system, but it was traveling at somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers per second when it entered Earth's atmosphere. It hit the shallow waters of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, at a location that geologists now call the Chicxulub crater, a structure roughly 180 kilometers in diameter, buried beneath a kilometer of subsequent sediment, invisible from the surface, detectable only through gravitational anomaly surveys, drill cores, and seismic imaging. The site was identified in the early 1990s through the work of geophysicist Glenn Penfield, and later connected definitively to the end Cretaceous extinction by Alan Hildebrand and colleagues in a landmark 1991 paper. It is one of the most consequential scientific identifications in the history of paleontology. What happened in the first second of impact is almost beyond the reach of ordinary imagination. The asteroid, moving at roughly 60 times the speed of sound, punched through the atmosphere so fast that the air in front of it could not get out of the way. The compression of that air generated temperatures comparable to the surface of the sun. The asteroid itself began to vaporize before it hit the ground. When it made contact with the shallow Cretaceous sea above the Yucatan shelf, roughly 900 meters of water over carbonate rock, the energy released in the first seconds of the collision exceeded by multiple orders of magnitude the combined yield of every nuclear weapon ever built by human civilization. The crater excavation happened in minutes. Rock that had been solid continental crust was briefly transformed into a liquid, then into a vapor. A plume of superheated material, vaporized rock, vaporized seawater, vaporized asteroid, was blasted upward through the atmosphere and into space. Some of this material escaped Earth's gravity entirely. Some of it went into suborbital trajectories and came back down, across the entire planet within the next hour. And when it came back down, it was still hot. Billions of particles of molten rock, spherules, scientists call them, and they are found in rock layers dating to this exact moment on every continent, re-entered the atmosphere and released their heat as they slowed. A study published in the Journal of Geophysical Research estimated that this global pulse of re-entering ejecta may have raised the temperature of the atmosphere by over 100 degrees Celsius in some regions for a period of perhaps 20 minutes to an hour. 20 minutes of sky-wide heat. Think about what that does to a forest. Think about what it does to an open landscape where a triceratops is grazing, where a herd of hadrosaurs is moving toward water, where young dinosaurs sit in nests that their parents can no longer protect. The forests ignited. The evidence for this is in the rock record: soot. enormous quantities of soot preserved in the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary layer, the KPG boundary as geologists call it, indicating continent-scale wildfires in the immediate aftermath of the impact. A 2019 study published in Scientific Reports analyzing boundary layer samples from sites across North America found soot concentrations consistent with the burning of a significant fraction of the world's above-ground biomass within weeks of the impact. But the fires, as catastrophic as they were not the killing blow. The killing blow was what came after the fires. When the vaporized rock and sulfur compounds and soot and dust reached the upper atmosphere, they formed a global aerosol layer, a thickening veil that blocked sunlight. The precise duration and density of this darkness is still a subject of active research and some scientific debate. Estimates range from months to years of significantly reduced sunlight. A 2017 study in the journal Geophysical Research Letters, using climate model simulations, suggested that global temperatures may have dropped by as much as 26 degrees Celsius on land in the aftermath of the impact, as sunlight was blocked by the aerosol layer. 26 degrees of cooling. In a world that had no ice age to calibrate against, no existing cold weather biological infrastructure, no populations adapted to anything remotely like this. But something arguably more important than the temperature drop was happening simultaneously. Photosynthesis stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Without sunlight penetrating to the surface, the plants, the entire base of the food web, the foundation on which every large land ecosystem rests, began to die. Not all at once, not instantaneously, but systematically, globally, inescapably. The primary producers collapsed. And when the primary producers collapse, every tier of the food web above them collapses in sequence. The herbivorous dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, the ceratopsians, the sauropods that had survived into the latest Cretaceous in some regions, began to starve. Not because they were slow or stupid or poorly adapted to their world, but because the plants were gone. Because something had happened that no amount of evolutionary refinement over 160 million years had prepared them for. The carnivorous dinosaurs held on a little longer. Carrion is a resource, and in the immediate aftermath of the impact, there was no shortage of it. But a predator ecosystem without prey is a countdown timer. Without herbivores, the large carnivores followed, days, weeks, months behind, depending on body size and metabolic needs. The largest animals with the greatest caloric requirements fell fastest. Tyrannosaurs needed enormous quantities of food to sustain bodies that weighed 6 to 9 metric tons. When that food disappeared, they had no metabolic reserve to fall back on. Their extinction, in geological terms, was nearly instantaneous. In real time, in ecological time, it probably played out over years. A generation, perhaps two. And then, silence. The non-avian dinosaurs were gone. All of them. Every species, every lineage, every ecological role they had occupied for over 160 million years. Apex predator, giant herbivore, mid-size omnivore, small cursorial predator. Vacated. Empty. Waiting. And the boundary layer in the rock, that thin, dark stripe of iridium-enriched clay that geologists can find in cliff faces in Spain, in river cuts in Montana, in road cuts in New Zealand, in ocean drilling cores from the South Atlantic, is the tombstone. Below it, dinosaur fossils. Above it, none. The sharpness of that boundary is itself a statement. This was not a gradual decline. This was a door, closing. Now, here is the question that matters for our story. If the impact was so catastrophic, if the sky filled with fire and then went dark for years, if the global temperature swung by 26 degrees, if the food web collapsed from the bottom up, then why did anything survive at all? Because things did survive. Many things. The birds, the avian dinosaurs, made it through. Not all of them. The large-bodied, ground-dwelling, specialized birds of the Cretaceous were mostly wiped out. But small-bodied, generalist species made it. They would diversify into the 10,000-plus bird species alive today. Crocodilians survived. Turtles survived. Lizards and snakes survived, though they took heavy losses. Frogs survived. Fish in the oceans survived at moderate rates. The small, burrowing, nocturnal mammals, most of them, survived. Why? Why did a Tyrannosaurus rex, perfectly engineered, 65 million years of refinement behind it, the apex predator of its entire continent, die, while a creature the size of a shrew, with no weapons and no armor, lived to see the other side of the catastrophe? The answer is not simple. It is not one thing. It is a combination of factors that happened to align in favor of a particular body plan and lifestyle. A body plan and lifestyle that had been shaped, remember, by 100 million years of darkness and pressure and enforced smallness. Size was the first factor. A small body requires far less food to sustain. When the food web collapses, a creature that can survive on insects, on the detritus of the dying ecosystem, on seeds buried in soil, on fungus growing on dead wood, has a buffer that a 6-ton predator simply does not have. The smallest mammals of the Cretaceous could survive on calories that would be irrelevant to a dinosaur. They could find food in places and at scales that were invisible to larger animals. Burrowing was the second factor. Many small mammals were already burrowers. Their lifestyle required it, going underground to sleep through the day, to avoid predators, to cache food, to raise young in protected spaces. Underground, the worst of the immediate impact effects were survivable. The heat pulse from re-entering ejecta that ignited forests above ground was a meter below the surface, barely a temperature fluctuation. The acid rain that followed the impact, sulfur dioxide from the vaporized Yucatan limestone, combining with atmospheric water to form sulfuric acid, was less lethal to an animal living underground than to one exposed on the surface. Dietary flexibility was the third factor. The mammals that made it through the KPG boundary were, in the language of ecology, generalists. They ate insects, they ate seeds, they ate roots, they ate small invertebrates, they ate whatever the collapsing ecosystem still had to offer. Specialization. The evolutionary strategy that produces the most efficient animal for a specific role in a stable ecosystem becomes a death sentence when that ecosystem disappears. A hadrosaur could not eat insects. A tyrannosaur could not survive on seeds. The generalist mammals could eat almost anything, and in the wreckage of the Cretaceous world, almost anything was exactly what was available. Metabolic flexibility was the fourth factor. Some mammals could lower their metabolic rate when food was scarce, a primitive form of torpor, the ancestor of hibernation. The ability to slow the body's engine when fuel is unavailable is, in a catastrophe that lasts months or years, a survival superpower. Nocturnal adaptation was the fifth factor. The eyes built for darkness, the rod-dominated retinas, the enlarged olfactory systems, the sensitive hearing, were suddenly operating in a world that had become globally much darker. The hardware that the mammals had been building for 100 million years of Mesozoic nights was precisely calibrated for a world with less light, less warmth, and more reliance on non-visual senses. The mammals had not evolved to survive an asteroid impact, but they had evolved to survive the dark. They had evolved to survive on very little. They had evolved to find food where no one else was looking. They had evolved to hide when the giants were hunting and move when everything else was still. And the impact, with brutal indifference, created precisely those conditions, globally, permanently. The spring had been compressed for 100 million years. The asteroid released it, but the release, the actual explosion of mammal diversity that would, in a few million years, produce creatures ranging from the size of a bumblebee to the size of 4 school buses, that is the part of the story that most people never hear. Because the takeover did not happen overnight. It happened in a world that was, for millions of years after the impact, still dark, still cold, still broken. And in that broken world, the survivors had to rebuild everything from nothing. Imagine inheriting a mansion. Not a pristine, fully furnished mansion with working electricity and stocked kitchens and gardens in bloom. A mansion that burned down 3 years ago, where the roof has collapsed and the walls are blackened and the grounds are covered in ash, and the only things moving through the ruins are scavengers picking through the wreckage. That is what the early Paleogene world looked like. The Paleocene epoch, the first chapter of the New World, beginning immediately after the KPG boundary 66 million years ago and lasting until roughly 56 million years ago, is not the lush green mammal paradise that popular imagination tends to picture. It is a damaged world, a world in ecological shock, a world where the machinery of life is trying to restart with most of its components missing. The forests are gone or reduced to fragments. The large herbivores that maintained open landscapes through grazing and browsing are gone. The predators that shaped the behavior of prey animals are gone. The insects, which depend on flowering plants, have crashed in diversity. The rivers carry strange chemistry from the disrupted soils. The atmosphere holds elevated carbon dioxide from the volcanic activity and fires, and the climate is swinging in ways that destabilize ecosystems before they can fully reestablish. Into this wreckage, the surviving mammals emerge from their burrows and leaf litter and forest understories and begin, tentatively, to explore. And here is where the story accelerates. Because the ecological vacuum left by the non-avian dinosaurs was not just large, it was almost incomprehensibly vast. Every large animal role on every continent was empty. The niches that had been locked, occupied, defended for over 100 million years were suddenly, completely, permanently open. Evolution does not tolerate a vacuum. Life fills available space. It always has. The question was not whether mammals would diversify to fill the empty niches. It was how fast and into what. The answer, in geological terms, was very fast indeed. Paleontologists studying the early Paleocene mammal fauna have documented what they describe as an explosive adaptive radiation, a rapid diversification of body plans, diets, and ecological roles within a relatively short geological time frame. A landmark study published in the journal Science in 2019, involving researchers from the University of New Mexico and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, analyzed over 16,000 fossil specimens from the Corral Bluff site in Colorado, a deposit of extraordinary richness that preserves mammal fossils from the first million years after the KPG impact in unusual detail. What they found at Corral Bluffs told a story of almost startling speed. In the rocks immediately above the KPG boundary layer, the first 100,000 years of the Paleocene, the mammals present are small. The largest are roughly the size of a rat. Their teeth are simple, generalist structures suited to an omnivorous diet. They are the survivors, still running the survival software that got them through the catastrophe. Still small, still cautious, still built for a world that no longer exists. But 100,000 years later, 100,000 years, which is a geological eye blink, but encompasses roughly 5,000 mammal generations, something has changed. Body sizes have increased. Not dramatically, not yet, but the trajectory is clear. Where the largest mammals before were rat-sized, now there are raccoon-sized animals moving through the fossil record. And the teeth tell the most important story. Dental morphology is the primary tool paleontologists use to reconstruct diet in extinct mammals, because teeth preserve better than almost any other tissue, and because the shape of a tooth is a direct fingerprint of what that tooth was designed to process. The teeth at Corral Bluffs, 300,000 years after the impact, show diversification. Crushing teeth, shearing teeth, teeth suggesting fruit eating, teeth suggesting leaf eating. The mammals are beginning to differentiate, beginning to spread out across the dietary landscape of the recovering world. 300,000 years after that, roughly 600,000 years post-impact, the body sizes have jumped again. Some mammals are now dog-sized. The teeth show further specialization. And something else appears in the fossil record at this level that the researchers at Corral Bluffs found particularly significant. Legume seeds. Legumes, the plant family that includes modern beans, peas, and acacias, appear to have undergone their own rapid diversification in the early Paleocene, perhaps partly in response to the increased mammal diversity and the ecological disruption of the extinction. And legume seeds are calorie-dense, protein-rich, and highly portable. They represent an entirely new food resource that mammals can exploit. And the evidence at Corral Bluffs suggests that mammals and legumes were diversifying in something like a coupled ecological dance, each group's expansion enabling and accelerating the others. This is ecology in real time. Fossilized, but real. And it is happening everywhere, simultaneously, on every landmass where mammals survived the KPG event. In Europe, different lineages are radiating. In Asia, different lineages still. In South America, which is at this point an island continent with no land connection to North America, the marsupial mammals and their relatives are undergoing their own independent radiation, producing forms that will, over millions of years, converge on ecological roles in ways that astonish evolutionary biologists even today. But while the pace of mammal diversification in the early Paleocene is rapid by geological standards, it is not yet producing the creatures that would dominate the later Cenozoic. The mammals of the early Paleocene are diverse in diet, but not yet diverse in form in the way that the great mammal groups of the later era will be. They are running a radiation, but within constraints. The world is still damaged. The plant communities are still recovering. The ecosystems are still simplified compared to what came before and what will come after. The true explosion, the event paleontologists call the Eutherian adaptive radiation, the diversification of placental mammals into their major modern groups, is coming. But it needs a trigger, and 60 million years ago, the trigger arrived. Not an asteroid this time, something slower, more complex, more interesting. The plants came back. Flowering plants, the angiosperms, had already existed in the Cretaceous, appearing in the fossil record somewhere around 130 million years ago, and diversifying significantly during the later Cretaceous, but they had not yet achieved full ecological dominance. Conifers and ferns still dominated many environments. The KPG extinction hit gymnosperms, the conifers and their relatives, hard. Their recovery was slow. The angiosperms, by contrast, recovered faster. Their reproductive strategy, flowers, fruits, seeds packaged with nutritional rewards that attract animal dispersers, turned out to be extraordinarily well-suited to a disturbed, rebuilding ecosystem. They could colonize disturbed ground quickly. They could form relationships with the newly diversifying insect fauna. They could produce edible fruits and seeds that offered calorie packages to animals in exchange for dispersal services. As the Paleocene progressed and conditions stabilized, the angiosperms spread. They began building the closed canopy tropical and subtropical forests that would characterize much of the next 30 million years of Earth history. And as they spread, they created new ecological architecture, new niches, new food sources, new opportunities that the diversifying mammals moved into with extraordinary speed. Fruits, leaves, bark, roots, nuts, seeds of extraordinary variety. Each new plant resource was an open door, and behind each open door, a mammal lineage walked through and began specializing. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. Every major group of placental mammals, the bats, the whales, the ungulates, the primates, the carnivores, the rodents, the elephants, the insectivores, appears to have diverged from a common ancestor within a window of roughly 10 to 15 million years following the KPG extinction. The molecular clock evidence, genetic analysis that uses mutation rates to estimate when lineages diverged, consistently places the origin of modern mammal orders in the early Paleocene and Eocene, 10 to 15 million years. After 165 million years of near stasis, after 165 million years of staying small, staying hidden, staying pressed against the bottom of the food web, the release, when it came, was extraordinary. Let us walk through some of the transformations because each one is a story of almost surreal evolutionary creativity. Consider the whales. 50 million years ago, roughly 16 million years after the KPG extinction, there was a land mammal living in what is now South Asia, in the region of modern Pakistan and India, that looks something like a large dog or a small wolf. It is called Pakicetus. It has 4 functional legs. It walks on land. But its inner ear structure, revealed by CT scanning of beautifully preserved skulls found in Pakistani fossil beds in the late 20th century, shows a distinctive feature found today only in whales and dolphins, a thickened, dense region of the ear bone called the involucrum, which in modern cetaceans helps transmit sound vibrations through bone during underwater hearing. Pakicetus was not a whale. Not yet. But it was on the path. Within 10 million years, a window that seems long in human terms but is extraordinarily short in evolutionary ones, the descendants of Pakicetus had moved into rivers, then coastal waters, then the open ocean. Intermediate forms like Ambulocetus, the walking whale, discovered in Pakistan in 1994, preserve the transitional stages with haunting clarity. Ambulocetus still had functional hind legs, but could undulate its spine in the up and down motion that modern whales use to swim, powered by a muscular tail. It was something between a sea lion and a whale, caught mid-transformation. By 41 million years ago, Basilosaurus, a fully oceanic whale up to 18 meters long with vestigial hind limbs too small to support its body weight, was hunting the warm Eocene seas. The transformation from land mammal to ocean apex predator had taken less than 10 million years. Consider the bats. Flight in mammals is one of the most dramatic evolutionary transitions in the entire Cenozoic record. The earliest known bat, Onychonycteris phanei, discovered in the Green River Formation of Wyoming and described in a 2008 paper in the journal Nature, dates to roughly 52 million years ago, and it already has fully formed wings. The intermediate stages, whatever they looked like, whatever gliding or leaping ancestors preceded the first true bat, are not yet known from the fossil record. The bat appears essentially fully formed in the early Eocene. What is known is that by 50 million years ago, bats were already diverse. Multiple families appear in the early Eocene fossil record, suggesting that the origin of bat flight was older, pushing back into the Paleocene, and that the radiation happened quickly. And what drove bat evolution almost certainly traces back directly to the nocturnal bottleneck. The neural infrastructure for echolocation, the extraordinary auditory processing system that allows bats to map their environment in complete darkness using reflected sound, did not appear from nowhere. It was built on top of the enhanced auditory processing systems that small Mesozoic mammals had been developing for 100 million years. The bats inherited the hardware and pushed it to its logical extreme. Consider the horses. The earliest horse, Eohippus, also known as Hyracotherium, was found in the early Eocene rocks of North America and Europe. It was approximately 30 to 60 centimeters tall at the shoulder, the size of a medium dog. It had 4 toes on its front feet and 3 on its back feet. It ate soft vegetation, fruits and leaves, rather than grass, because grasses had not yet become ecologically dominant. It was essentially a small forest browser. From this beginning, from this knee-high, 4-toed forest dweller, the evolutionary lineage of horses would spend the next 50 million years gradually increasing in body size, reducing the number of functional toes from 4 to 1, and transforming the teeth from soft food browsers to the hard, high-crowned, grass-grinding structures of modern horses, tracking the spread of grassland ecosystems across North America. The horse lineage is one of the best documented evolutionary sequences in the fossil record. A sequence so complete, so well preserved, so clearly narrated by the rocks of the American West, that Thomas Huxley used it in the 19th century as one of his primary examples of evolution in action. Consider the primates. The earliest primates, the lineage that would eventually produce monkeys, apes, and humans, appear in the fossil record in the early Paleocene, very shortly after the KPG boundary. Purgatorius, known from tiny teeth found in the Hell Creek and Tulloch formations of Montana, may represent one of the earliest members of the primate lineage, living perhaps just hundreds of thousands of years after the extinction event. If this identification holds, and it is still subject to some scientific debate, then the primate lineage was one of the first mammal groups to begin diversifying in the empty Paleocene world. The early primates were small, tree-dwelling, fruit-eating animals with the enhanced color vision, actually a partial recovery of color vision, through a duplication of one of the remaining cone cell genes that allowed them to distinguish ripe fruit from unripe against a background of green leaves. This forward-facing eyes, providing depth perception for navigating three-dimensional tree environments, grasping hands with nails instead of claws, allowing precision gripping of branches and food items. These adaptations, the eyes, the hands, the enlarged brain, were the foundation on which, tens of millions of years later, everything that makes human beings distinctive would be built. The creatures hiding under the roots of Cretaceous ferns were, in the most literal biological sense, us. Not yet, not for a very long time yet, but the direction was set. The hardware was accumulating. The lineage was moving, step by incremental step through the radiating Paleocene world towards something that not even the most powerful tool of natural selection could have predicted or intended. Something that would one day look back at the fossils of the creatures it came from and try to understand the journey. But before we get there, before we follow the primate lineage toward its most improbable destination, we need to return to a question that has been hovering over this entire story. Was the asteroid the only reason the dinosaurs died? Or was something else already happening? And what does the answer tell us about how close the mammal revolution came to never happening at all? Before the asteroid hit, the Earth was already on fire. Not metaphorically, literally. In what is now northwestern India, beginning roughly 66 million years ago and continuing for hundreds of thousands of years before and after the KPG boundary, one of the largest volcanic events in the history of the Cenozoic era was underway. The Deccan Traps, named from the Sanskrit word for stairs, describing the stepped landscape of layered lava flows that cover an area roughly equivalent to the size of modern France, were pouring basaltic lava across the Indian subcontinent in quantities that are genuinely difficult to conceptualize. We are not talking about the kind of volcanic activity that makes headlines today. We are not talking about a single mountain erupting or even a chain of volcanoes producing a notable event. We are talking about what geologists call a large igneous province, a flood basalt event, where fissures in the Earth's crust open across hundreds of kilometers and lava simply pours out, continuously, for thousands of years at a stretch, then pauses, then pours again. The total volume of lava produced by the Deccan Traps event is estimated at over 1 million cubic kilometers. If you spread that evenly across the continental United States, it would bury the entire country under roughly 100 meters of solid rock. And lava, as destructive as it is locally, is not the primary killing mechanism of a flood basalt event. The gases are. Every cubic kilometer of basaltic lava releases enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and other compounds into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with atmospheric water to produce sulfuric acid aerosols, the same mechanism, incidentally, that contributed to the post-impact killing winter, but operating over a much longer timescale. Carbon dioxide, released in massive quantities over thousands of years, drives atmospheric warming. The Deccan Traps event was, in other words, producing a slow-motion version of some of the same atmospheric disruptions that the asteroid would deliver in fast forward. And it was doing so before the asteroid arrived. The scientific debate about the relative contributions of the Deccan Traps and the Chicxulub impact to the end Cretaceous extinction is one of the most vigorous ongoing arguments in the entire field of paleontology. It is not a settled question, and it matters enormously for our story. On one side of the debate are researchers like Gerda Keller of Princeton University, who have argued for years that the Deccan volcanism was the primary driver of the end Cretaceous extinction, that the dinosaurs and marine ecosystems were already in serious trouble before the asteroid, and that the impact was the final blow to a world already destabilized by volcanic gases and climate disruption. On the other side are researchers who argue that the fossil and geochemical evidence points overwhelmingly to the impact as the primary cause, that the extinction was geologically instantaneous at the KPG boundary in a way that extended volcanic activity simply cannot explain, and that the sharpness of the iridium layer and the extinction horizon in the rock record demands a catastrophic sudden cause. A 2019 study published in Science using new high-precision dating of the Deccan lava flows added an extraordinary wrinkle to this debate. The researchers found evidence that the Chicxulub impact itself may have intensified the Deccan volcanic activity, that seismic waves from the impact traveling through the Earth's interior, triggered an increase in the rate of lava outflow within hours to days of the collision. The two catastrophes may not have been independent. The asteroid may have literally turned up the volume on a volcanic event that was already underway. If this finding holds up to further scrutiny, and it is still subject to active scientific discussion, then the end Cretaceous extinction was not one catastrophe. It was two catastrophes interacting with each other, compounding their effects in a geological coincidence of truly staggering improbability. And the mammals survived both. But here is the question that should stop you cold. What if the asteroid had missed? It is not an idle thought experiment. The Chicxulub impactor was traveling at an angle. Estimates based on crater asymmetry and ejecta distribution suggest an entry angle of perhaps 45 to 60 degrees from the horizontal. If the asteroid had arrived at a slightly different angle, or had been traveling even slightly faster or slower, or had hit a different part of the planet, deeper ocean rather than shallow carbonate shelf, for instance, the energy released into the atmosphere would have been significantly different. Models suggest that a strike on deep ocean would have released far less sulfur dioxide because there would have been far less sulfur-rich carbonate rock to vaporize, and might have produced a significantly less severe or shorter impact winter. A slightly different impact, a slightly less severe winter, a faster recovery of plant communities, and perhaps, the dinosaurs survive. Diminished, restructured, but present. Still occupying the large animal niches, still keeping the ceiling over the mammals firmly in place. The entire subsequent history of life on Earth, including the primates, including the apes, including the genus Homo, balanced on the precise angle and location of a rock falling from space 66 million years ago. The contingency of evolution is one of the most intellectually vertiginous concepts in all of science, and nowhere is it more stark than here. But let us return to what actually happened, because even with the asteroid, even with the simultaneous volcanic catastrophe, even with the collapse of the global food web, the story of what came next is not simple, and the complications are important. The mammals that survived the KPG boundary did not inherit a stable world. They inherited a world that continued to be geologically and climatically unstable for millions of years. And several times during the early Paleocene and Eocene, the recovering mammal lineages faced additional crises that could have ended the radiation before it began. The most dramatic of these was the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 55.9 million years ago, roughly 10 million years after the KPG extinction. The early mammals are already diversifying, already spreading into new ecological roles, already beginning to produce the first members of lineages that will eventually become the modern mammal orders. The world is warmer than today. This is a greenhouse world, with no permanent polar ice caps and palm trees growing in what is now Alaska. And then, in a geological instant, within 20,000 years, possibly far less, the global average temperature spikes by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The deep ocean waters warm by 4 to 5 degrees. The carbon isotope ratio in ocean sediments shows a massive, rapid influx of isotopically light carbon into the atmosphere and ocean, a carbon isotope excursion that geochemists can measure in sediment cores from ocean drilling sites around the world. Something released an enormous pulse of carbon into the atmosphere. The exact source is still debated. Leading candidates include the destabilization of methane hydrates on the ocean floor, frozen methane deposits that, when warmed, release the gas into the water column and then the atmosphere, or massive volcanic activity associated with the opening of the North Atlantic as the continents continued to separate, or a combination of both in another compounding cascade of geological events. Whatever the cause, the effect on life was significant. Ocean acidification killed vast numbers of bottom-dwelling marine organisms. Many mammal lineages in North America and Europe went extinct or were severely reduced. New mammal groups appeared, apparently migrating between continents as land connections were temporarily available or adapting rapidly to the new conditions. And body sizes shrank dramatically. Across multiple mammal lineages, at the onset of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, animals got smaller, significantly smaller. A study published in the journal Science in 2013 documented this effect in fossil horses from the Bighorn Basin in Wyoming. Over a period of roughly 10,000 years, at the onset of the thermal maximum, early horses decreased in body size by roughly 30%. Then, as temperatures cooled and the event ended, body sizes recovered. This is Bergmann's rule, the ecological principle that animals in warmer climates tend to be smaller because a smaller body surface area to volume ratio helps shed heat more efficiently, playing out in real time in the fossil record. Temperature went up, bodies got smaller. Temperature came down, bodies got larger again. The sensitivity of mammal evolution to climate is almost shocking in its clarity. These animals were not passive passengers on a geological ride. They were responding generation by generation to the conditions around them. The fossil record of the Paleocene and Eocene is not a static sequence of forms. It is a dynamic, responsive, constantly adjusting system, reading the environment and changing accordingly. And through all of these disruptions, the lingering effects of the KPG impact, the Deccan volcanism, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, the subsequent cooling events of the Eocene, the mammal radiation continued. Slowed sometimes, redirected sometimes, punctuated by extinctions of individual lineages, but never stopped, never reversed back to the small and hiding baseline of the Mesozoic, because the ceiling was gone. That is the crucial asymmetry. In the Mesozoic, every time a mammal lineage began to diversify upward, began to produce larger-bodied, more ecologically prominent forms, it ran into the ceiling of dinosaur competition and predation. The Rapinammamus experiment, the Castorocata experiment, the Velaticotherium experiment, all of these were contained, limited, unable to propagate because the large animal ecological space was occupied. After the KPG extinction, there was no ceiling. There was no competition from above. The large animal niches were empty and stayed empty because the only lineage capable of filling them at the scale the dinosaurs had occupied, the non-avian dinosaurs themselves, was gone. And so the mammals grew. Not all. Many lineages retained small body sizes. The shrews and moles and hedgehogs of today are essentially conservative survivors, retaining something close to the ancestral small mammal body plan. Small size is not a failure. It is a perfectly functional ecological strategy that the Mesozoic had proven, beyond any reasonable doubt, to be extraordinarily resilient. But the lineages that moved into the open large animal niches grew with a speed that still astonishes paleontologists who study this period. 48 million years ago, just 18 million years after the KPG extinction, an interval shorter than the time since the earliest known members of the genus Homo, there were already large browsing mammals in the forests of North America and Europe. Uintatherium, a rhinoceros-sized herbivore from the Middle Eocene of North America, had a skull over half a meter long, decorated with multiple bony protrusions and long canine tusks. It was not a dinosaur. It was not even related to any living large mammal group. It was an experiment, an early attempt by the mammal radiation to fill the giant herbivore niche that would eventually go extinct and be replaced by other lineages. 37 million years ago, in the late Eocene of Pakistan and Egypt, early relatives of modern elephants were already present. Small by the standards of their descendants, roughly the size of a large pig, but unmistakably on the Proboscidean path, with the beginnings of the skeletal architecture that would eventually produce animals weighing up to 10 metric tons. 25 million years ago, in the Oligocene, something walked the grasslands of Central Asia that had no equal in body size among land mammals before or since, outside of the largest sauropod dinosaurs. Paraceratherium, sometimes called Indricotherium in older literature, was a hornless relative of the rhinoceros, and it was enormous in a way that requires deliberate effort to visualize. Current estimates, based on multiple partial skeletons found in Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China, place its shoulder height at around 4.8 meters, its total body length at roughly 7 to 8 meters, its weight at somewhere between 15 and 20 metric tons, though some estimates run higher. To put that in perspective, Paraceratherium could have looked a Tyrannosaurus rex in the eye. The largest land mammal that has ever lived since the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, browsing on high vegetation with a long, flexible neck, moving across the Asian landscape in small groups or alone. Too large as an adult for any predator of its time to challenge directly. The mammals had not merely filled the ecological space left by the dinosaurs, they had, in some respects, exceeded it. They had taken the blueprint of the large terrestrial herbivore and pushed it to the physical limits of what a land-based, air-breathing, warm-blooded body can sustain. And in the oceans, the transformation was equally staggering. The whale lineage, remember Pakicetus, the dog-sized land mammal with the whale ear, wading in South Asian rivers 50 million years ago, had, by 34 million years ago, already produced fully oceanic giants. Basilosaurus, which we mentioned in the previous chapter, represents an early peak, but the story does not end there. The whale lineage continued to diversify through the Oligocene and Miocene, eventually producing the mysticetes, the filter-feeding baleen whales, whose body size reached the largest of any animal in the history of life on Earth, the blue whale. 150 metric tons, 30 meters long, a heart the size of a small car, a blood vessel wide enough for a human being to crawl through, built from the same lineage as the tiny nocturnal, insect-eating Mesozoic mammal pressing itself into the leaf litter while a dinosaur footstep shook the ground overhead. That lineage. That specific lineage of warm-blooded, big-eared, sensitive-nosed, darkness-adapted, small-bodied survivors became the blue whale. The scale of that transformation, from Morganucodon to Balaenoptera musculus, from 2 grams to 150 metric tons, from hiding under a fern to diving 500 meters into the ocean, is so extreme that it barely seems like it should be possible within the framework of natural selection operating on normal timescales. But it did not happen in a single leap. It happened in millions of individual steps, each one small, each one selected because it provided some marginal advantage in a specific environment at a specific moment in time, across 160 million years of darkness, and then 66 million years of expansion. The whole story, the compression and the release, took 225 million years from the first cynodonts to the blue whale. 225 million years. And we have not yet arrived at the most improbable part of the story. Because somewhere in the diversifying mammal radiation of the Eocene and Oligocene, a small lineage of tree-dwelling, fruit-eating, forward-eyed, grasping-handed creatures was quietly accumulating a set of neural and social and behavioral adaptations that would eventually produce something the Mesozoic world, for all its extraordinary complexity and diversity, had never seen. A creature that could ask questions about its own past. That chapter is next. 34 million years ago, something changed in the climate of Earth that would, over the next 30 million years, set in motion the most improbable chapter in the entire history of mammal evolution. The planet began to cool. Not suddenly, not catastrophically, not with the violence of an asteroid or the drama of a flood basalt event, but steadily, persistently, irreversibly, driven by the movement of tectonic plates opening new ocean circulation patterns, by the slow drawdown of atmospheric carbon dioxide, by the gradual growth of Antarctic ice sheets as the southern continent drifted into its polar position and the ocean current that had been moderating its climate was cut off. The warm, humid, forested greenhouse world of the Eocene was giving way to something drier, cooler, more seasonal. The vast tropical and subtropical forests that had covered much of the middle latitudes during the warmest periods of the early Cenozoic were beginning to contract toward the equator. Grasslands, a relatively new ecological system, still expanding and diversifying, were spreading into the spaces the forests left behind. For most mammal lineages, this was simply a new set of pressures: adapt, migrate, or disappear. For one particular lineage of tree-dwelling primates in Africa, it would become the pressure that changed everything. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us go back to the beginning of the primate story. Back to the early Eocene, roughly 55 million years ago, when the first primates that we can clearly identify from the fossil record were already diversifying across the forests of North America, Europe, and Asia, continents that were, at this time, still connected or closely enough approached to allow faunal exchange. These earliest primates belong to a group called the Plesiadapiforms, creatures that look at first glance something like a cross between a squirrel and a small monkey. They had grasping hands with nails rather than claws on at least some digits. They had eyes positioned more toward the front of the skull than the sides, providing the overlapping visual fields that produce depth perception. They had relatively large brains compared to other mammals of similar size. They also had one feature that would define the primate lineage for the next 55 million years: a profound, almost obsessive relationship with trees. Trees provided everything: food in the form of fruits, leaves, seeds, insects, and small vertebrates, safety from ground-dwelling predators, three-dimensional space to navigate, which rewarded precision movement and sharp spatial awareness, social opportunities, because trees, paradoxically, create social environments, concentrating animals in resource-rich patches and forcing the development of communication, hierarchy, and cooperative behavior. The three-dimensional arboreal environment is, many researchers now believe, the crucible in which the distinctive primate brain was forged. Navigating a tree canopy, leaping between branches, judging distances, tracking moving targets, remembering the location of food sources across a complex three-dimensional landscape, makes cognitive demands that flat ground simply does not. The primate brain grew and continued to grow because the forest rewarded intelligence with survival. A study published in Nature Ecology and Evolution in 2017, analyzing brain size data across over 140 primate species, found that the primates with the largest relative brain sizes were consistently those living in the most complex social groups. Groups with the most individuals, the most complex dominance hierarchies, the most sophisticated communication systems. This is the social brain hypothesis, first articulated by British anthropologist Robin Dunbar in the 1990s. The idea that the primary driver of primate brain expansion was not foraging complexity or tool use, but the cognitive demands of navigating complex social relationships. To live in a large primate group is to engage constantly in a web of alliances, rivalries, coalitions, deceptions, reconciliations, and negotiations that requires tracking the relationships and motivations of dozens of individuals simultaneously. It requires theory of mind, the ability to model what another individual knows, wants, and intends. It requires memory, communication, and strategic thinking. The forest built the social brain, and the social brain built everything else. By 35 million years ago, the primate lineage had already split into its two major modern groups, the strepsirrhines, which includes modern lemurs, lorises, and galagos, and the haplorhines, which includes tarsiers, monkeys, apes, and humans. The split happened in Africa, and the earliest members of the monkey and ape lineage, the anthropoids, were already present on the African continent by this date, known from fossil sites in Egypt, particularly the Fayum Depression, a now arid area southwest of Cairo that was, 35 million years ago, a lush subtropical forest threaded with river systems draining into the ancient Tethys Sea. The Fayum fossil beds have produced an extraordinary window into early anthropoid evolution. Species like Egyptopithecus zeuxis, known from well-preserved skulls and postcranial bones found by Elwyn Simons and his colleagues from Duke University beginning in the 1960s, show us a creature roughly the size of a modern howler monkey, with a brain noticeably larger than expected for its body size, forward-facing eyes, and teeth suggesting a diet of hard fruits and seeds. Egyptopithecus was not yet an ape. It was a stem catarrhine, an early member of the group that would eventually split into Old World monkeys on one branch and apes on the other. But it was already carrying the neural and dental and social infrastructure that would, 20 million years later, produce the first true ape. The first apes, the hominoids, appear in the fossil record in East Africa roughly 20 to 23 million years ago, in the early Miocene. The early Miocene of Africa was a time of extraordinary primate diversity, with dozens of ape species known from fossil sites in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Species like proconsul, known from remarkably complete skeletal material discovered on Rusinga Island in Lake Victoria, with significant contributions from Mary Leakey, who found a complete skull there in 1948, give us our first clear picture of what an early ape looked like. Proconsul was, in many ways, a peculiar creature by modern standards. It had the brain size and dental pattern of an ape. No tail, broad chest, shoulder joints allowing a wide range of arm movement, but it moved through the trees in a more monkey-like fashion, without the full below-branch suspensory locomotion that modern great apes use. It was a transitional form, caught between the ancestral monkey body plan and the derived ape one. But the Miocene was not just a time of ape origin. It was the golden age of apes. Between 23 and 5 million years ago, apes were extraordinarily diverse, far more diverse than they are today, ranging across Africa, Europe, and Asia, in dozens of species occupying a wide range of ecological roles and body sizes. Gibbons, great apes, and dozens of forms with no living descendants moved through the Miocene forests in a diversity that makes the current situation, 4 genera of great apes clinging to shrinking forest fragments, look like the aftermath of a catastrophe. Which it is. But that story is for another video. In Europe, Between about 16 and 9 million years ago, apes were particularly diverse and abundant. Species like Dryopithecus in Spain and France, Civipithecus in Pakistan and Turkey, and the remarkable Oreopithecus from the island of Tuscany, which was isolated long enough to develop its own unique body plan, including features that some researchers have controversially interpreted as adaptations to occasional bipedalism, give us a picture of ape diversity across the Old World that is genuinely astonishing. And then, roughly 10 to 7 million years ago, the climate cooling that had been building since the Eocene delivered another major pulse. The African forests, already contracting, shrank further. Grasslands expanded. The mosaic of forest and open country that characterizes much of modern Africa began to take shape. For the apes, this was a crisis. Most of the Miocene ape diversity disappeared. Lineage after lineage went extinct as the forests they depended on contracted. By 5 million years ago, the extraordinary ape diversity of the Miocene had been reduced to a small number of surviving lineages. The ancestors of modern gibbons in Asia, the ancestors of orangutans in Southeast Asia, the ancestors of gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans in Africa. And it is here, in this drying, cooling, fragmenting African landscape of the late Miocene and early Pliocene, that the most consequential event in the history of the mammal radiation took place. One lineage of African apes stepped out of the trees, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, haltingly, forced by the shrinking of the forests and the expansion of the open country in between, one lineage began spending more time on the ground. And on the ground, a new pressure applied, a pressure that would reshape the body, the brain, and ultimately, the entire trajectory of life on this planet. The pressure was distance. In the forest, food is dense, close, and overhead. Movement is vertical as much as horizontal. On the open savanna and forest edge, food is scattered, distant, and on or near the ground. Covering distance efficiently becomes survival critical, and the most efficient way for a large-bodied primate to cover distance on the ground, more efficient in terms of calories burned per kilometer than knuckle walking, is to stand upright and walk on two legs. Bipedalism, the defining physical characteristic of the human lineage. It was not in the beginning about intelligence. It was not about tools or language or social complexity. It was about getting from one patch of food to another without burning too many calories in a landscape that was becoming less forgiving by the generation. The fossil evidence for the transition to bipedalism has accumulated in extraordinary detail over the past 50 years through the work of researchers across East and South Africa. The most famous early biped is, of course, Australopithecus afarensis, the species to which the famous Lucy skeleton, found by Donald Johanson and Tom Gray in the Afar region of Ethiopia in 1974, belongs. Lucy dates to roughly 3.2 million years ago. She was small, roughly 1 meter and 10 centimeters tall, perhaps 25 to 28 kilograms. Her brain was small, roughly 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, not much larger than a chimpanzee's. Her face was projecting and ape-like. But her legs, her pelvis, her foot bones. She walked upright. The Laetoli footprints in Tanzania, preserved in a layer of volcanic ash dated to 3.6 million years ago by Mary Leakey and her team in 1976, show the tracks of 3 individuals walking upright across a landscape that was, at that moment, being dusted with ash from a nearby erupting volcano. The footprints are anatomically modern enough in their arch structure and toe alignment that, placed beside a modern human footprint in the same medium, they would not seem obviously out of place. 3.6 years ago. Upright walking. In creatures with chimpanzee-sized brains, this is crucial. This is one of the most important things to understand about human evolution, because popular culture consistently gets it backwards. Bipedalism came first. Big brains came later. Much later. The brain expansion that produced the genus Homo, the lineage that includes modern humans, did not begin in earnest until roughly 2 to 2.5 million years ago, more than 1 million years after bipedalism was already established. And the trigger for that brain expansion is still one of the most actively debated questions in the entire field of paleoanthropology. The leading hypotheses involve a combination of factors. The development of stone tool use, which is first evidenced in the fossil record at roughly 3.3 million years ago at the Lomekwi site in Kenya, predating even the genus Homo, and which becomes dramatically more sophisticated with the Oldowan tool industry associated with early Homo around 2.6 million years ago. The cooking of food, argued most forcefully by Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham in his book Catching Fire, which proposes that the controlled use of fire to cook food, making calories more bioavailable and dramatically reducing the digestive processing time required, freed up metabolic resources that were redirected toward brain tissue growth. Increasing dietary quality through meat eating, which provides the dense, complete protein and fat profiles that large brain tissue requires. And social complexity. Always in the primate lineage, social complexity. The social brain that the forest had been building for 50 million years did not stop growing when the apes left the trees. If anything, the open savanna environment, with its greater predator pressure, its more scattered and unpredictable food resources, its demand for cooperative foraging, hunting, and defense, intensified the selective pressure for social intelligence. Groups that could coordinate, groups that could communicate, groups that could teach each other, groups that could plan ahead, share food, care for the weak, remember the location of water sources across a landscape spanning hundreds of kilometers. These groups survived. The individuals who were better at these things left more descendants. And so the brain grew. From 400 cubic centimeters in Australopithecus afarensis to 600 to 800 in early Homo habilis to 900 in Homo erectus to the extraordinary 1,300 to 1,500 cubic centimeters of anatomically modern Homo sapiens. The brain tripled in size in less than 3 million years. In a lineage that had been refining its neural hardware since the Jurassic, since Morganucodons enlarged olfactory lobes, since the social processing demands of Eocene primate forests, since the spatial navigation requirements of Miocene canopy life, the final acceleration was almost explosive. Consider the timescale. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. The first cells appeared roughly 3.8 billion years ago. The first animals appeared roughly 600 million years ago. The first vertebrates roughly 520 million years ago. The first mammals roughly 225 million years ago. And anatomically modern Homo sapiens, creatures biologically identical to every human alive today, appear in the fossil record at roughly 300,000 years ago in Morocco, at the site of Jebel Irhoud, in a study published in Nature in 2017 by Jean-Jacques Houblin and colleagues from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. 300,000 years. In a 4.5 billion year story, that is not even a rounding error. If the entire history of Earth were compressed into a single calendar year, a metaphor you have heard before, but bear with it, because the numbers still shock. The first cells appear in late February. The first animals appear on November 15th. The dinosaurs appear on December 12th and are gone by December 26th. And anatomically modern humans appear at approximately 11:59 and 39 seconds on December 31st. We have been here for 21 seconds. The tiny Mesozoic mammal, Morganocodon, pressing its 2-gram body into the dark earth while the Jurassic night moved with sounds it had learned to read with extraordinary precision, has been here in various forms for over 200 million years. We are the newest experiment, the most recent chapter of a story that began in the Triassic, the current expression of a lineage that survived the Permian aftermath, survived the dinosaur dominance, survived the asteroid and the volcanism and the thermal maximum and the Miocene drying and the Pliocene cooling. A lineage that survived everything the planet threw at it by being small, flexible, smart, and relentlessly adaptable. And now that lineage, our lineage, stands upright on the same planet where its ancestors once trembled at the footfall of giants, and asks the question that no other product of natural selection in 4 billion years of life on Earth has ever asked. How did we get here? The final chapter has an answer, and it is more extraordinary than anything we have covered so far. There is a bone in your ear. Right now, as you watch this, inside the small dark cavity of your middle ear, 3 tiny bones are vibrating. They are called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Together they form the smallest bones in the human body. Together they form the most precise mechanical amplification system in the history of vertebrate evolution. Sound waves move your eardrum. Your eardrum moves the malleus. The malleus moves the incus. The incus moves the stapes. The stapes transmits the vibration into the fluid of the inner ear, where it becomes an electrical signal, which becomes a nerve impulse, which becomes sound inside your mind. This system is so sensitive that it can detect vibrations smaller than the diameter of a hydrogen atom. And as we established in the second chapter of this story, those 3 bones were once jaw bones. They were part of the jaw joint of a cynodont, a pre-mammalian creature living in the shadow of the first dinosaurs, 225 million years ago, using those bones to eat. Over millions of generations, they migrated. Millimeter by millimeter, generation by generation, they moved from the jaw to the ear. Driven by the pressure of Mesozoic nights, by the survival value of hearing in the dark, by the relentless logic of natural selection finding a better use for existing material. You carry those bones right now. You carry the entire story right now. In your ear bones. In your rod-dominated retinas, still outnumbering your cone cells by a ratio of roughly 20:1, the permanent mark of 100 million years of darkness. In your olfactory system, still disproportionately large in your brain's architecture, still capable of recognizing over 1 trillion distinct scents, according to a study published in Science in 2014. In your capacity for dreaming. REM sleep, the deep dreaming sleep that is a mammalian invention and that many researchers now believe serves a critical function in memory consolidation and neural maintenance, the kind of mental housekeeping that a large complex brain requires. And your ability to shiver when you are cold, the involuntary muscle contraction that generates heat, the same endothermic emergency response that allowed your ancestors to stay active in the Mesozoic night while the world around them slowed and cooled. In the way you instinctively recoil from a loud sound in the dark. In the way your heartbeat accelerates when a shadow moves unexpectedly. In every anxiety, every vigilance, every scanning of an unfamiliar room when you enter it, you are running software written in the Jurassic, responses shaped over millions of years by a world where the shadows were full of creatures that would kill you without noticing they had done so. You are not separate from this story. You are its current expression. And that is something worth sitting with before we pull back to the full picture. Because the full picture is extraordinary. Let us count what the mammal lineage has produced since that first small cynodont began its evolutionary journey in the shadow of the archosaurs. Today, the class Mammalia contains roughly 6,500 known living species. They inhabit every continent, including Antarctica, where seals and whales work the waters under the ice. They inhabit every ocean to depths of nearly 3,000 meters. The Cuvier's beaked whale holds the record for the deepest mammal dive, reaching 2,992 meters in a documented dive off the coast of California. They inhabit the air. The approximately 1,400 species of bats represent roughly 20% of all living mammal species, making them the second most species-rich mammal order after rodents. They inhabit deserts where surface temperatures exceed 70 degrees Celsius. They inhabit Arctic environments where temperatures drop below -50. They range in body size from the bumblebee bat of Thailand, Kitty's hog-nosed bat, Crassionycteris thonglongyai, weighing approximately 2 grams and measuring roughly 3 centimeters in body length, to the blue whale, at 150 metric tons and 30 meters long. 2 grams to 150 metric tons. Morganocodon to Balaenoptera musculus. The same lineage, the same fundamental body plan, warm blood, hair, mammary glands, the 3-bone middle ear, the differentiated teeth, the enlarged brain. Pushed by 225 million years of natural selection into forms so different that if you showed a biologist from another planet only the extremes, they might not believe they were related. But let us address something directly, something that the title of this video asks, and that we have been building toward throughout every chapter. Did the mammals destroy the dinosaurs? No. Let us be precise about this, because the language of destruction and empire and revolution, language that makes for compelling storytelling, and we have been using it deliberately throughout this video, can obscure what actually happened. The mammals did not kill the dinosaurs. An asteroid, combined with volcanic activity and the cascading ecological collapse that followed, killed the non-avian dinosaurs. The mammals were passengers in that catastrophe, not its architects. They survived not through aggression or cunning or any active strategy, but because the toolkit that 100 million years of persecution had built happened to be the right toolkit for the specific type of catastrophe that occurred. The mouse did not conquer the empire. The empire collapsed, and the mouse was still there when the dust settled. What the mammals did, what they deserve genuine credit for, is surviving long enough, adapting broadly enough, and building deeply enough in the dark that when the opportunity finally came, they were ready to take it. Fully ready. With 100 million years of refinement behind them, and not a single ecological role they were philosophically opposed to filling. That is the real story. Not conquest. Endurance. Followed by explosion. But there is a layer to this story that we have not yet fully addressed. A layer that changes the framing of the entire narrative in a way that tends to genuinely surprise people when they first encounter it. The dinosaurs are not gone. They never left. When we say the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct at the KPG boundary, we are being precise in a way that popular culture almost never is. The dinosaurs did not go extinct. One lineage of dinosaurs, the avian dinosaurs, the birds, survived. And they are not former dinosaurs, or dinosaur descendants in some loose metaphorical sense. They are, by the rigorous standards of modern phylogenetic taxonomy, living dinosaurs. Birds are dinosaurs in the same sense that bats are mammals and crocodilians are archosaurs. Not poetically, taxonomically. Every sparrow on every windowsill in the world right now is a living dinosaur. Every chicken ever consumed in human history was a dinosaur. The approximately 10,000 species of birds alive on Earth today represent a dinosaur lineage that never went extinct, that survived the KPG boundary as small, probably generalist, ground or tree-dwelling avian dinosaurs, and then underwent their own adaptive radiation through the Paleocene and Eocene into the extraordinary diversity of modern bird life. The mammals, in other words, did not inherit a world emptied of dinosaurs. They inherited a world where the flying dinosaurs were still very much present, diversifying aggressively through the same post-impact world, competing with the early bats for aerial insect prey, filling arboreal and terrestrial roles that overlapped significantly with the mammal radiation. The story of the Cenozoic is not mammals replacing dinosaurs. It is mammals and birds. Two extraordinarily successful radiations, both with Mesozoic origins, both shaped by the same catastrophe, expanding simultaneously through the same emptied ecological space, sometimes in competition, sometimes in complementary roles, together building the biosphere that we live in today. And the competition was real. The large, flightless, carnivorous birds of the early Paleocene and Eocene, the phorusrhacids in South America, popularly known as terror birds, and the similar gastornids in North America and Europe, were genuine apex predators competing directly with the large mammal carnivore lineages for the top predator role in the empty post-impact world. Gastornis, standing nearly 2 meters tall with a skull the size of a horse's and a beak built like a geological hammer, was for a significant period of the early Eocene one of the dominant large animals of North American and European ecosystems. The mammals eventually won the large terrestrial apex predator role, but it was not automatic. It was not inevitable. It was competed for, generation by generation, in ecosystems where birds and mammals were running parallel evolutionary experiments in the same spaces simultaneously. Now, let us zoom out one final time, because the story of the mammal revolution is not only the story of the past, it is also uncomfortably and urgently the story of the present. We are currently living through what many researchers describe as the sixth mass extinction in Earth's history. The figures are stark and well documented. According to a study published in the journal PNAS in 2017, vertebrate population losses over the past century alone have been so severe that the authors describe the situation as a biological annihilation, a phrase they chose deliberately, carefully, and with full awareness of its weight. Mammal species are going extinct at rates estimated to be between 100 and 1,000 times the background extinction rate, the natural rate at which species disappear in the absence of catastrophic disturbance. The large mammals, the megafauna, the elephants and rhinos and big cats and great apes that represent the most recent and most spectacular expressions of the 66 million year radiation, are the most vulnerable. Their large body sizes, their slow reproductive rates, their dependence on large undisturbed habitat, their position at the top of food webs, all of these are the same features that made Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops vulnerable to the cascading collapse of the KPG extinction. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. The asteroid that ended the Cretaceous was an external force, unrelated to any living thing on Earth. The extinction unfolding today has an internal cause, a species that evolved from the same lineage as every other mammal on Earth, that carries the same Jurassic ear bones and the same rod-dominated retinas and the same instinctive fear responses forged in Mesozoic darkness, and that has, in the geological eye blink of the last 200 years, altered the planet's atmosphere, oceans, forests, and climate more rapidly than any force since the Chicxulub impact. We are the first mass extinction caused by a mammal. That is a sentence worth sitting with. Not as a condemnation, not as a reason for despair, but as a piece of context, as a data point in the longest story we know, the story of life on Earth, that helps us understand exactly what is at stake. Because the fossil record tells us something important about what comes after mass extinctions. Life recovers. Life always recovers. The Permian extinction erased 96% of marine species, and life rebuilt. The KPG extinction erased the dominant land vertebrate lineage of 165 million years, and within 10 million years, mammals had diversified from rat-sized survivors into whales and horses and primates. The Earth is extraordinarily resilient across geological time, but the recovery takes millions of years, and the species that went extinct, Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Paraceratherium, the Steller's sea cow, the passenger pigeon, the western black rhinoceros, those specific species do not come back. The evolutionary experiments they represented, the specific solutions to specific ecological problems that they embodied, the genetic information they carried, gone. Permanently. Not to be recovered within any time frame that is meaningful to human civilization or to any individual human life. This is what the fossil record teaches us about extinction. Not that life is fragile. Life is astonishingly robust, but that specific expressions of life, once lost, are lost forever. The universe does not run the same experiment twice. And so we return, at the end of this story, to where we began. A tiny creature in the dark. 2 grams, 10 centimeters. Large eyes scanning a Jurassic night full of sounds its extraordinary ears are processing with precision tools 100 million years in the making. A heartbeat racing at perhaps 500 beats per minute. Fur the color of the earth it presses itself against. A brain proportionally enormous for its size, tracking scent trails and memorizing territory and calculating, in the wordless but supremely effective language of survival, the safest path to the next meal. It does not know that the giants above it will one day be gone. It does not know that its descendants will walk on 2 legs across African savannas and build cities and launch spacecraft and write symphonies and dig into the earth to find the bones of the creatures that once terrified. It does not know anything in the way we use the word know, but it does the one thing that over 225 million years turns out to matter more than size, more than armor, more than weaponry, more than the sheer overwhelming force of the most successful land animals that ever lived. It survives the night, and then it survives the next one, and the one after that. One night at a time, one generation at a time, one tiny incremental adaptation at a time, it builds, in the dark, the machinery that will eventually produce everything. The whale diving 3,000 meters into black water, the bat painting the night in sound, the elephant remembering the location of a water source it visited 30 years ago, the chimpanzee using a stick as a tool, the child asking for the first time, why? All of it, every last extraordinary expression of the mammal lineage, built in the dark, underneath the feet of giants who never knew it was happening. There is a question that paleontologists and evolutionary biologists and philosophers of science return to again and again when they examine this story. A question without a clean answer, but one that the story demands we ask. Was any of this inevitable? Was the rise of intelligence inevitable? Was the rise of complex social behavior inevitable? Was the rise of a species capable of asking questions about its own origins inevitable? Or was it a contingency, an accident, a consequence of an asteroid hitting at a particular angle on a particular type of rock at a particular moment in the tectonic history of a particular planet? The honest answer is that we do not know. We have one data point, one planet, one history of life. We cannot run the experiment again. We cannot watch a version of Earth where the asteroid missed, or where the Deccan volcanism ended differently, or where the KPG mammals that survived were a slightly different set of species with slightly different tools. What we can say with confidence is this: intelligence of some kind was probably coming. The fossil record shows again and again across multiple independent lineages that cognitive complexity tends to increase over evolutionary time when the ecological conditions reward it. Cephalopods, the octopus and squid lineage, have evolved remarkable intelligence completely independently of the vertebrate lineage, from a common ancestor that had no brain worth mentioning. Corvids, the crow and raven family, have evolved tool use, planning, and social learning completely independently of the primate lineage. Dolphins have evolved complex social intelligence, signature whistles functioning essentially as individual names, and cooperative problem-solving in a fully aquatic context. Intelligence is not a single experiment. It is a convergent solution to a recurring set of ecological problems. It keeps being invented independently by lineages separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolution, because it works. Whether it had to be our specific lineage, the cynodont to mammal to primate to ape to human pathway, that produced the specific type of intelligence capable of asking these questions and understanding these answers, that we cannot say. But it was. And the story of how it happened, the full story, from the Triassic shadow world to the Jurassic dark, to the asteroid winter, to the Paleocene explosion, to the Eocene forests, to the African savanna, to the first stone tool, to the first question asked and answered. That story is written in rock and bone and tooth and gene and ear and eye. Written in the 3 tiny bones vibrating in your ear right now. Written in the rod cells in your retinas that still outnumber the cone cells because 100 million years ago, darkness was the price of survival. Written in the automatic way you track movement in your peripheral vision and the way your heart rate changes when you hear a sudden sound in the dark. You are not watching a documentary about prehistoric creatures. You are a prehistoric creature, watching a documentary about yourself. The mammal that survived the end of the world. The mouse that outlasted the empire. The trembling, coin-weight, darkness-adapted, big-eared, sensitive-nosed, warm-blooded, fast-hearted, endlessly adaptable creature that pressed itself into the Mesozoic earth while giants shook the ground overhead. It made it. You are the proof. And the questions it never knew to ask, about where it came from, about what those giants were, about how the world became what it is, those questions are yours to carry now. So carry them well. If this story changed the way you think about where you come from, leave a comment. Tell us the moment that hit differently. Tell us the fact that stopped you. Tell us the chapter that made you reconsider something you thought you knew. Because this conversation, this specific human capacity to share knowledge across generations, to build on what others discovered, to collectively remember a past that none of us lived through, this is the newest and strangest tool in the mammal kit. 225 million years in the making. Use it. Build on what others discovered to collectively remember a past that none of us lived through. This is the newest and strangest tool in the mammal kit. 225 million years in the making. Use it.